to arrive, or
So
did you want
welcome.
to wait a couple minutes?
Yeah, you can start. That's fine.
Oh, I can start? Okay.
Yeah. We're
All right.
4 minutes past the hour, I think. So
Okay.
okay.
Can you just tell me approximately how many people are here? Because I can't see.
We are 9,
9.
including yourself.
Okay, perfect. Just wanted to know for some of the for the Mentimeter. Okay,
Alright.
perfect. So today I'm just very excited to be here to share with you sort of my stories and my journey around grading and talking about why assessing for equity matters. So I would like to start with land acknowledgement. So I am from Seneca, and so the Seneca Polytechnic in Toronto, Ontario, Canada. So Seneca's campuses are located on the land stewarded by Anishinaabe, Haudenosaunee, and the Wendat Nations. We acknowledge Treaty 13, Toronto Purchase, signed with the Mississaugas of the Credit First Nation, and the Williams Treaty, signed with multiple Mississauga and Chippewa First Nations. We are all interconnected as treaty people with a shared obligation to learn, respect, honor, and sustain. Many of you are joining us from all over Turtle Island and name many Indigenous peoples used for North America or around the world, and we encourage you to seek out whose ancestral lands you are on today. As a mother, a teacher, administrator, and researcher, I continue on my journey to understand educational equity. I am committed to digging deep into our beliefs about education and learn more about the disservice to marginalized students. We can work on a process of truth and reconciliation that frees us from the grip of racism and restores the dignity and worth of every human being. So this is actually the first of 3 workshops that I proposed to do for MyFest. And the first one is really a bit of a storytelling, a little bit of talking about my journey and really talking about grading. The second workshop, which is next week, again, the same time, same place on Wednesdays, will be Let's Talk Pizza. It's actually focusing more on the actual alternative and authentic assessments and some exemplars and some examples that we can share around and talk about creating those authentic assessments in response to today, it's focusing more on grading. And then the last one, I just call it Let's Talk. I wanted to be a little bit more open. I wanted to talk about feedback and evaluations. I want to talk about rubrics. I want to talk about academic integrity. So really things that are related to the topic of grading and assessment, but maybe little sort of loose ends, and try to tie it all together in the last workshop. So a little bit about me. I am the director of the Teaching and Learning Center at Seneca Polytechnic. So Seneca is the largest college, I guess, in Canada. We have about 80,000 students. So my background, I guess I have a degree in engineering, started a little bit of career in engineering, and then I moved into education. So I have been a K-12 sector for quite a while, and some of my stories today come from my experiences in K-12. But I was a teacher, a consultant. My focus and my passion was math education. So I was a Ministry of Education for the government. I was a provincial math lead. And then I moved into administration, and I actually went back to the classroom, and then I ended up being a vice principal of a high school. From there, I was recruited into Seneca as a director of the Teaching and Learning Center. Really pretty exciting, really having a lot of work right now in flexibility and providing flexible options for students, different modalities, teaching different modalities, and also thinking more about curriculum integration. How do we integrate our 3 pillars, which is sustainability, EDI, and truth and reconciliation into a meaningful way into our curriculum and classrooms. I have a big passion around, very passionate around assessment and academic integrity. And I'm working right now on a book chapter for a book on academic integrity, focusing on vocational and colleges. And I think, as you can see from the picture, I have a big passion for music. So I am a violinist, I play guitar. I belong to a duo called Blue Moon. We just released our first album this summer. And I also have a family with 2 boys that are adult big boys, a husband, and my dogs. I have 2 dogs, but I favor one, which is Jasper, because he's my dog, and he's a pandemic dog. We got him during the pandemic, so he's scared of everything, but he's a lot of fun. So that's a little bit about me. So rather than sort of posting an agenda, what I'm going to do today over the next hour and a half, I thought I would talk a little, I would express some statements that I think students might say, and look at those as goals of these workshops, and what we would observe and hear from students in their classroom ideally. So I'd like to hear my students say, my culture, identity, learning, or ways of knowing were valued today. Today, I felt a sense of belonging in my classroom. Today, I had an opportunity to ask questions and build my understanding. And today, I had the opportunity to show what I know in my own way. And I think it really wraps up kind of, what summarizes what I would like to see and what I would like to hear in the classroom. And so we're going to sort of work towards these sort of, I think, goals of what we would want to see and observe in our students. So I did have in the title, why does assessing for equity matter? And I do want to delve more deeply into assessments and grading in this series of workshops. And we should know, first of all, that schools in the 20th century were designed with the belief that student achievement occurs on a curve. Students are motivated through extrinsic reinforcements, and we tend to focus or tend to side on the punitive model with consequences, looking at consequences for students as opposed to rewarding students. And then schools were really in the business of sorting and ranking our students. And the way that we have been assessing and assigning grades, and this I know is still happening in classrooms, is students, the way that we do it, or the way we have done it in the past in the traditional grading, is we end up with students not wanting to take risks. We really destroy trust between teachers and students. We support that idea of the commodity of grades. And we often hide information. It invites biases, and it provides misleading information or no information about our students. It can demotivate and disempower our students. And it really is a deficit model rather than an asset model. So this is why I think it's really important to think about assessing for equity. This takes a little bit different approach to looking at grading for equity, but I think I needed to let you see this book that is by Joe Feldman, Grading for Equity, what it is, why it matters, and how it can transform schools and the classrooms. A little bit different, I guess a little different take on it than what I'm going to present today, or what I'm going to talk about today, but I think a very important book looking at traditional grading and how the case for changing, and how to have traditional grading become more effective, or sorry, changing from the traditional grading to something that's more effective and equitable for teaching and learning. So a great book. I wanted to recommend that here. It seemed to fit in just about here. Okay, so why do we need to think about equity? And so these are sort of just some numbers to give you some context of where I am and why I think it's really important. So I work at Seneca Polytechnic, as I said, is a large college in Canada. And we have 40% of our students that are international students from over 150 countries. So 25,400 students last year were international students. So we have a large population of our students that are international. And this will be very similar to many of our post-secondary institutions in Ontario, which is where I am in Canada. So this would be pretty common for both the colleges and universities in Ontario. We also have currently 22% of our students that are self-identified as having a learning disability. And these are, note that this is self-identified. So population of students that are not included here will be those who won't identify due to being in a post-secondary institution. They may not. Also, that stigma of needing help. Sometimes when they move from high school into university or colleges, they may not want to identify learning disabilities, thinking that they would like a fresh start and not have that stigma with them. So those are not included in this 22%. And these learning disabilities would require accommodations. And we have a large counseling and accommodations center that would work with these students that have self-identified with the learning disabilities. Just in terms of Canada, I think this is a good year, actually, 2017, because then you can think about the ages of students that are around 15. And so these students now would currently be in our system. So this gives you a little bit more information about how disabilities are have been identified in Canada, the majority of having 2 or more types of disability, and then looking at 13% in that age group 15 to 24, 20% in that working age, and 38% in seniors. Now, the 13 and 20 are important because we are a college, and so we have quite a lot of students of different age ranges. So we have students that come right out of high school, who may be somewhere closer to 19, 20 years of age, but then we have a lot of students who come back into our system after working for a while, wanting to upgrade their education. And we also have students who take breaks from after they leave high school and then come back. So the ages will range are quite different than maybe a traditional university. We have quite a lot of people who come back to get diplomas and certifications. In terms of mental health, this is from the National College Health Association Canada. I don't think it's probably any surprise to anybody anywhere that in post-secondary students are reporting much higher incidence of depression, anxiety, attempted suicides, and reporting of diagnosed and treatments for anxiety. And so lots of different types of pressures and stress in post-secondary, even I think prior to the pandemic, and maybe more so post-pandemic. So I think that's definitely an important thing to keep in mind. In terms of the USA, I was reading that about a survey where a number of 13 to 17-year-olds were surveyed. 70% of those surveyed believe that anxiety and depression was a major problem among their peers. And also, and as I said, the 13 to 17-year-old of this particular year of 2019 report would mean that those are the students that are currently in our system now at our college. And so 70% of them who were surveyed believe that anxiety and depression was a major problem. And there's lots of I think lots of reasons, and I can imagine you can think of many reasons why anxiety and depression is a major problem with these students. Also, if you drill down a little further, 61% of those that were surveyed, is again back to the USA survey. It does say that 6 out of 10 of these teenagers noted that getting good grades was important. They felt a lot of pressure in getting good grades, and they felt that this was linked to what they saw as mental health issues for themselves and for their peers. So something to keep in mind. So that's kind of the data, and that's kind of the sort of setting the context for us as to why it's so important that when we look at assessing and teaching our students, that we really keep in mind that we have many students that are marginalized, that needed to be supported. And so that's kind of where I start and why it's important to me. I wanted to just touch on this idea of data and how we use data. This is something that is common, is using learning analytics, using data to understand more about our students, and that's all great. But I was reading, I really love this book, I will share with you later, called Street Data. by Shane Sacher and Jamila Dugan. And I really started to keep going back to this book and looking at it again and again, and really, sort of connecting with it. And that this one part is around data, and it talks about the levels of data that we collect. And I find it a really great way of describing data and why it's important to really get down to the street data and really involve students and student voice when we're looking at transformation of our ways of assessing and grading. So if you start with satellite data, that's kind of your largest grain size, right? And from that, you'll be able to find patterns, and you can find patterns of achievement, equity. You can maybe find patterns that link to teacher quality, and we can also look at retention of students with that data. And it would point us pretty much in a general direction that allow us to maybe keep looking at things. So a lot of times we collect data in Ontario, we collect, Ministry of Education collects data. We still have standardized tests. They collect information from K-12 students at the college. We look at retention data, we look at achievement data all the time. We have lots of learner analytics. So I sort of look at that as satellite data, something that we look at from quite high up as a higher level. And it does give us some ideas around, what direction we should be going. And then we have the map data, and the map data is maybe sort of a medium grain size, a little bit smaller, and it's really about collecting more information around student skills, getting some information around achievement gaps or skill gaps, pointing us in the right direction in terms of instructional skill gaps for teachers even. And so really, looking at things like maybe, particular areas, like we have students who struggle with math or fluency or with decoding. And so it's really giving us a way to look at and point us in a slightly more focused direction using the map data. But then we now move to the street data. This is fine-grained data and really giving us more of that street level. And so here we're really focusing on student experiences. We can get a much better idea of misconceptions and their mindsets. We can look at how they internalize important skills, and it really helps us monitor our student skills. So the street level is what I want to focus on, where I want to be. It's more about listening and having observations of our students and really informing and shaping what our next moves will be. And so how do we know what we know? Well, in the Western approach to knowledge building through research and data, we've typically characterize and classify societies into subcategories, right? So we've always provided the standard model of comparisons. Year to year, we collect all this information and we put them into these subgroups. And then we provide criteria of evaluation against which other societies can be ranked. And then we see that knowledge is valued and that data can be verified by these measurements. We view them as neutral and scientific, and we don't think about the spiritual, the social, the story-centered forms of knowledge or the traditional knowledge. And so terms like achievement gap and skills gaps and grades and subgroups, that becomes really normal for us to speak in these terms. So I think maybe we've been asking the wrong questions and maybe we need to tell a different story. And I think focusing on street data will give us that. So it's really about reimagining our data, no longer using data necessarily as a tool just for accountability and oppression, but really thinking about data and that street data, the tool for learning and sparking creativity. So marginalized students now have an opportunity to be part of the learning conversations and to experience the belonging in the classroom and to provide more meaningful and personal contributions to the classroom because you were listening and you were making those observations. So I think this, I just wanted to share with you, this is the two student videos that if we could stop the recording, that would be great. And then we could start the recording again after I finish this slide. So these are two students and I know that, so around a bit here. So the street data takes us down to the ground. It lets us observe and listen to and gather artifacts from the lived experiences of our students. And the views, I think, are now more asset-based. It's helping educators look for what's right in our students and our schools and communities. It helps us see what's getting in the way of learning, and then allowing us to make those changes so that we can engage all of our students in our classroom practices, our assessments, our policies. And I think it'll give us some systematic information about equity. So the street data that I keep talking about and will illuminate for us how implicit biases and microaggressions, however subtle they can be, can actually influence learner experiences of inclusion and belonging. So they're real-time indicators with quick feedback loops, and it helps us inform our everyday decisions. And I think, as the authors of the book says, we can develop a living toolkit of strategies for gathering the street data. So I was thinking that as I start talking about grades, I was going to share a story with you about grades, how to transform the culture of grading to a culture of assessment. And then the more I thought about this, I'm thinking about my story, and I thought, it isn't really just about grades or report cards or about testing. The real story is actually about motivation and cultivating creativity in the classroom. So I'll start by thinking about my own creative process, right? So, that sort of idea on creativity, nature versus nurture. So my roots, where I came from, who I thought I was, and then I thought about nurture, the environment I had growing up. For example, I had very high expectations from my Chinese parents. So this was, something that got me started thinking about creativity in my own journey. But maybe I was more like Steve Martin, who's an actor and thought about, and a comedian. And, maybe I was just naive. Like, maybe I didn't realize that I wasn't actually any good at what I was doing, whether I was drawing or doing music. I don't think it really mattered. I think I have been able to be creative and innovative in my life so far. And maybe it's just that I was just being naive. So learning should have a creative focus. It should allow students to explore educational avenues that are beyond just completing a test or assignment for marks. And the whole push towards getting good grades has, I think, really minimized the ability of students to be creative and to be innovative. So this is what I noticed. I noticed first that grades are the primary form of communication and the reflection of students' progress. It always has been, I think, for a long time. As teachers, we've been led to believe this percentage or letter grade will indicate to students, and I guess in this case, my parents, a measure of a certain skill or knowledge in a subject like math, English, or science. So here's an example of a report card. I actually got a B+ in mathematics, and if you read there, you want to say, I guess you're looking at talking about the test results. I like the little comment about my notebook condition being very commendable. I also wonder, about these report cards and, could they be early predictors of the future? And anyone reading this will probably tell you that the part where I'm quiet and my approach to things about being quiet, doesn't work. So that didn't predict very well. So the question is, do we ask ourselves, do we inspire students? Do we pique curiosity? Can we create environments where learning can flourish? And so the question I think that we need to ask ourselves is, how are we going to accomplish this? So I guess I'll start with this idea around surprise. And so surprise might be kind of an odd thing there, but let's continue along the lines of cultivating curiosity and creativity in our classrooms with our students. So in my teaching days, I like to parallel all my lessons and activities with that element of surprise. There's actually quite a lot of research done on this, which supports surprise as a cognitive emotional phenomenon that will impact the many aspects of mental activities, including learning and memory. So there is some research that supports that surprise can be part of that process of making sense or explanation, finding explanations, or metacognitive explanation-based theory. It proposes that people's perceptions of surprise can actually help them explain the surprising outcome. So the theory actually predicts that surprises actually should be more surprising than others because they are harder to explain, right? So if you have something that's surprise, that's more unexpected and it's harder to explain, I guess your brain works harder in trying to figure out why it's doing that, and then trying to recall that. And because you're doing that, actually your recall or your memory is more accurate of those those big surprises, or the ones that are more harder to explain. So I guess as an example, maybe just easier to explain what I do in my classroom is I start off with some kind of, if you think about a self-relevant unexplained event. So maybe like you're walking into a surprise birthday party and you're surprised. And so there's a certain amount of emotions, pretty much like you're happy and excited. But then you quickly move into that second phase where you're going to be emotional and you're thinking, why did this happen? How did it happen? Who planned this, and how come I didn't know about it? So I might give a problem to my students, and the students will be, curious, and they want to know more, and they start to ask questions, and they're driven to find out more. And then they move into that explanatory stage where they're like, problem solving, trying to explain why it's working or not working, what's happening in that problem, and then reach an understanding of that event. And then they get to the point where they're able to talk about it. So they will adapt, they'll share, and then reflect. And that really is kind of what my classroom was like. And I think it is a way of thinking of how to create, encourage creativity and curiosity from your students. So for an example, this is actually from part of a final evaluation assessment instead of an exam. I just posted a lot of photographs around the classroom and asked my students to come up with questions. And these are the kind of questions they were going to end up answering in their exam. So this is a picture of the largest hamburger in the world. And my students would say things like, how many regular burgers is that equal to? Or how many pounds of meat is that? How many slices of cheese did they use? And what would the takeout box look like for that? And so they come up with these questions, and we're thinking in this classroom, we're talking about proportionality. So perfect, we're talking about proportions, and they're going to do some calculations of proportions. It will bring in geometry where they're like designing boxes and takeout boxes. So many different things came in to play just with this photograph, and really just that idea of getting them to be curious and to ask questions and to honor that. So I'm just now moving to questions. So the next part that I think is really important is asking good questions in your classroom. And that sets you up to really have a better way of using open-ended questions to help students get involved into the conversations and getting them to feel included. So many years ago, this is actually just last year, but this is a second edition, but many years ago, I wrote a book with Marion Small on differentiating secondary mathematics. And it was all about creating open-ended questions to allow all students in the classroom to participate, no matter who they were, where they were, what they understood, their skill set didn't matter. Everybody was able to take part because I changed the types of questions I asked in my classroom. So not to get into any of the more difficult math, I just use this example of what is the hypotenuse of a right triangle if the legs are 3 units and 4 units long. And so that is a question that's using Pythagorean theorem. It's a closed-ended question with one answer, one way of doing it pretty much. But then you move into a question like, one side of a right triangle is 5 units long. What could the other side lengths be? So you see, I've made a very slight change. I turned it into an open-ended question. People could use numbers they're comfortable with. People could start drawing pictures. There are like all kinds of ways that they can get different answers and different avenues to get to that answer. So the open-ended question is, so again, very important, the type of question that you ask and the type of, and I think these open-ended questions will allow a lot more conversations to happen. And I guess just to demonstrate how you can, it's not just, asking questions, but really focusing on being intentional in your type of question you're asking. So I worked on big ideas, or you could be thinking about mastery or concepts, certain concepts. There's a learning goal for your lesson, whatever it is, there's a big idea in there that I want to get at, and I'll use the open question to get at that particular big idea. In this case, the question is describe a situation with the expression 5x. And what's that situation going to be? And so it could be like $5 bills or 5 fingers on your hand or $5 tickets, whatever you have, all these different situations that students can come up with. But the big idea behind that is that the same algebraic expression or pattern is related to different types of situations and vice versa. So it is getting at a big idea. And so that's how I formulate the questions. So basically, I guess to sort of sum up, what thinking about the classroom environment and what that sort of looks like and more what we tend to do. This is a great, I really like John Spencer's books, and one from Launch. He talks about the tourist trap and being the tourist, and starting, this is your thinking about the different things. So for example, I have a map, and so I choose where we're going to go. I smile because I was the only one excited. I have an itinerary, so I decide on the pace and I decide how we would get there. I have a backpack. I'm the one who handles and provides all the resources. I have a camera, and so I'm the only one actually documenting this journey. And then I have this hat because I'm trying to be relevant, but really I'm the only person with this tacky hat. So, this idea of this being a tourist in your classroom, trying to move away from these ideas and trying to think of a classroom where the students are empowered and have a lot more say, and that we listen to them and observe them more, and they're much more part of that classroom. So I guess that was all just to say that if we are working so hard, and I do believe that there are some really, really great effective classrooms where people are using great questioning techniques, doing project-based learning, lots of different exciting things are happening in our classrooms for sure. And I think that's really great. And we put a lot of effort into that. And we've been thinking about how to create and cultivate curiosity and creativity. But why should our assessments look any different? And so this is where it just always confused me, right? And why does our assessments look different? So you've gone along and you've had students be excited, and you have these learning activities. And yet when you go into to figure out whether they've learned anything, you now turn it into a test question, or you turn it into an assignment or an essay or whatever it is that you're doing. And you moved away from what you've thought about in terms of how to get them excited and creative in the class. So I don't think our assessments should look any different. And next week, I'm going to spend a little bit more time talking about actual examples and higher ed examples of more authentic assessments and alternative assessments. So I just want to focus a little bit more on grading today, though. So I'm just going to touch on UDL because it's actually, in terms of equity and equity-based assessing and teaching, obviously universal design for learning is very important. This is probably not new to any of you. UDL, obviously, the research on it and in learning sciences and cognitive neuroscience, it's very important that we've talked about UDL in terms of guiding all of us as educators, thinking about those 3 principles of universal design of learning: multiple means of engagement, representation, and action expression. So we do want to examine how we design our lessons using the multiple means. And I think we're going to focus today a little bit on multiple means of action and expression to look at demonstrating competency. So I'm going to move right into the next slide. So just hopefully that was very quick. I can put it back up again if you're not sure. I think there's a link in this to actual, if you wanted to look at UDL a little bit more in more depth of that chart again. I think the link is in there anyway. So this is just a quick little nutshell. So one of the things that we do, that we produce at Seneca, are what we call nutshells, and people love them. So nutshells are modules, and generally a nutshell takes about 30 minutes or 45 minutes to complete. It usually focuses on a couple of key strategies in an area, and then a couple of activities, and then And they can usually wrap it up between 30 and 45 minutes. Obviously, we're not going to do something that takes 30 to 45 minutes. So this is just one strategy, one activity, taking a look at UDL and assessment and just thinking about it from that point of view. So there's you can scan the QR code to get into the nutshell, or you can use the bit.ly if it doesn't work. So you should, maybe someone can let me know that they got in okay, or they can see it. So I'm going to give you, it should take about five minutes or so to do it, to work through the nutshell, and then we can talk a little bit about it. Did we access it okay?
Oh yeah, I went off that.
Yep.
Sorry, what are we doing?
Excuse me, is it
could you
possible to provide the link on the chat? Yeah,
Samo, that's what I was going to ask. Thank you. Thank you.
Yeah, I just pasted it, though it doesn't become a link. But
Are you able to get it from the chat link?
there is no chat link.
Oh, okay, so I can,
If you had shared your slides, probably it would have been easier, but you could also share the link in the chat. That would
I
be-
can, yeah, I can put that in for you.
Thank you.
I don't know what I'm supposed to be doing.
Does that work?
Yes, and then we can pick up the other
yes,
links.
thank you.
You're welcome. I have a note here, put the link in chat. How are we doing? Very quiet. Just looking at the time, just maybe another minute and we can just talk a bit about what we were reading there. Okay, so I don't actually not too sure where you are. I'm just looking at some of the somebody has posted in the Padlet. And I don't think anyone, I think people are just sort of looking at the other two assignments, but that's okay. You can always return to it anytime to look at it. There are some good resources there provided in the resource page. And of course, there's things that you can read or you can watch or you can listen to. I did want to just ask that question again, not so much about where you're making the changes or to the written summary to demonstrate the multiple means. I think probably most of you can think of different activities that you can do instead of a written summary. But what do you think? I mean, someone has commented here already about, will this assignment meet the needs of all of your students? Why or why not? And there's a very good answer here about someone written about goals, and that's true. Like, it depends on what your goals are. But why would you think that, like, why wouldn't this be an example? I mean, it's a good video. It's a decent quality video. It's a persuasive letter. It's kind of might be interesting to do. It makes them think about their own learning. So why would you think, why wouldn't it be, or do you think this is attending to all learners, and why or why not? You could type something into the chat if you want right here, or you can unmute and talk if you like to.
I think it would also depend on what else has happened, if there's time between that video and then when this assignment happens, because if the students are not already familiar with the concept of metacognition, it's a very brief video for them
sure.
to then write something about it. So, I would, especially if I was doing it with K-12, like allow some time for a discussion so we all are on the same page with what we got from the video, and maybe have them throw out examples so that they can really make it personal to them and they understand what it is, and have something to write, a basis to write that letter on, because this is sort of like an assignment that you're sort of just asking them to generate a position that you told them to take.
Right. And I guess my point is here is in terms of multiple, if you're looking at UDL, you probably wouldn't have just, like you said, just shown a video and then say, okay, write something. I think there would be probably some, maybe activating some prior knowledge, right? You probably would want to have a discussion beforehand or some kind of activity, and then you'd want them to have time to maybe discuss with other people. They could do group work or work in pairs. And so I think it's about, having those sort of multiple means of multiple representations before. So it's even more than just an assignment that has multiple means of action and expression. I think it takes into a little bit more about how would you I think that's what I guess I'm trying to get at for the, what other formats could they use to demonstrate their learning, right? So, so yeah, so I think what you're saying is true. Like, there's got to be more happening, I think, and I think there's a way of setting up this type of assignment that would be more inclusive. Okay, so I'm going to move on. I know if you haven't, added to it, that's okay. It was just really to just bring up to remind, I guess, us of how important UDL can be, how useful it can be in thinking about what we're doing and what we're doing in the assessment. So I wanted to make sure that we didn't leave that out, that we make sure we talked about it. Okay, and so I guess I wanted to do now, I was going to have a Mentimeter, but because there's so few of you, I don't think it would really matter too much. So again, I think it might be just better if you typed into the meeting chat what you think and around grading. So I'm going to move into this, talk more about grading in general and talk about sort of strategies around grading less, I guess. But let's start with thinking about why do we grade. So don't bother going to the Menti because there's not that many of you. So I think it would just be easiest if you put your what you were thinking into the chat and I can look at it. I have my chat open now. So why do we grade? What do you think are the reasons why we would grade? If you want to talk, that's fine. If you want to just type into the chat. Okay. Okay, so we have tracking progress, of course. Grading being a tool as a purposeful instructional design, yep, and that allows for use of feedback. Good. Encouraging students to study, interesting. Influence behavior by reward and punishment, and then a check for understanding of the subject. Yep, so those are all really great reasons for grading. But let's take a look at it a little bit more closely, what the grade actually means. So if you think about it, I'll talk a little bit historically what grades have been doing, but yes, rank and sort. I think someone talked about that. Sometimes they're used, yes, to look at whether they get into grades are used to whether they, as you said, get scholarships or get resources, or it could be also to get into grades are used or GPA to get into a particular program, like med school or law school or a grad program. The grades we do use them, I guess, traditionally for ranking and sorting. We also use them for comparison. So grades have been always used to compare, as I said, putting people into categories or groups as common. And we have that, you'll see that we have Dean's List or, in different types of categories that students are put in year to year. They're also used for comparison. So if I give a test, I return a test to my students in my classroom, the first thing they're going to do is look at their mark. They're not going to look at my feedback. They're going to look at the mark. The second thing they're going to do is look at someone else's mark. So that's what they're going to do. They're going to compare. And that's typical of what students do with their grades is they look at it and then they compare. So it has been used to compare students to each other. What it results in, it's also, as someone talked about motivation, it is extrinsic motivation, right? So it's considered extrinsic motivation. And then I think sometimes it causes, because of that, it does cause some stress, sometimes even fear in students. And I think in the end, it does get in the way of learning. So historically, grades have been around a really long time. And so I guess, interesting enough, I guess 1785, I think, is the earliest I could find something on grading at Yale University. So I'm just going to give you a history of grading in like 3 minutes. And I know there's a lot written about this, but at Yale University, it was the first grading scale by Eric Stiles. And so you'll see that in a lot of different write-ups around history of grading. In 1817, it looks like that first professional qualifying exam happened, and that was for medical examination for people to become doctors from the British Society of Apothecaries. And then in 1911, as we started to move away from that one classroom, and we had more urban centers, that's when they first created the first report card. And then we move into percentage grades were starting to be used in the late 18th, early 20th century. And then letter grades, is the more common, I guess, used as letter grades representing the groups of percentages. Most of you probably thought about or heard of course, the bell curve. And so that's often in conversations when we talk about grades and putting students on a curve. And so, grades, I guess it was interesting. Alfie Cohen wrote about the case against grades in 2011. Some of his articles, I pulled out are 1960s, 70s, 80s, talking about grades. So like we've been talking about this for decades, and talk about the effect of grades in 2011, so not long ago. We talked about grades and how they diminish students' interest in what they're learning. We talked about grades, creating a preference for, making it, an easy task. Grades tend to reduce the quality of students' thinking. And those are all talked about for many years, but again, not that much has changed really in terms of the way that we grade. So I guess in this one, I was going to do another Menti, but again, question here is for average marks. So what did they actually tell you? And so this is kind of an interesting thought. So I just picked, 4 students, and these are the marks that I collected from them, maybe through tests, assignments, essays, whatever that you're doing, and you pick 5 of them. All through the semester, you get to the end of the semester, and they all each have 75% or a grade of B, I guess, if 75 is in that place that gives you a B. So, but what does that tell you about each of these students? And what do you know? And if you notice, there's quite different. There's one who seems to get around 75 the entire time. Someone kind of bombed one of the first assignments and then got better. Someone improved. Someone did really well at the beginning and started to get, it started to slack off. So, so what do we actually know about these first, even though all of them come up with a 75? And then I guess the question for you, which again, don't go into Menti because there's not really enough of you, but what do you know about the student? So if you get the student in your class and you were told that in the first, in first year, they got a 75% average, what does that mean? What do you know about that student? What did it tell you about that student? So someone here is saying that the B grade indicates gaps in knowledge, but doesn't really indicate where the gaps are exactly. So it's kind of interesting. So we put a lot of, importance on that 75. And so you have a student that walks into your classroom and you knew that they had a 75 last year, but what do you know about that student? And I think we're all pretty much agree that we don't know that much about that student and anything about how they learn or their perseverance or how hard they tried or anything really about them, how creative they are. It's none of that ends up being part of that. The other thing that, of course, and I've touched this and we talked about this in terms of mental health, not only is it, in terms of a demotivator and, really sort of overemphasizing achievement has always given students stress and pressures. And we have a lot of international students, as I said before, who have a lot of pressure, whose parents, who parents or family have sacrificed a lot for them to come to Seneca. And so there's a, extra pressure on them to get good grades. And sometimes it's difficult, they have language barriers and they have a lot to, cultural differences, and they have to think of, and so a lot of times we really need to think hard about, in terms of the grades and the stress levels that we're creating for our students and the pressures. So I wanted to give you a little bit, I'm going to just play this video for you. It's 5 minutes. It's actually an Ignite, which means that it's 20 slides. You get 20 slides and they automatically advance every 15 seconds. So it's actually kind of a challenging talk to do, but so this one it's just a little bit of my story. So I'm just going to play it for you.
So I want you to think back to a time where you were playing at the park with your friends and you were very excited about imagining things and discovering things and learning and experiencing through play. Our math classrooms are a little bit more rule-based, and not always have we had students being interested in coming to those classrooms and participating and asking questions and answering questions. And so for some time, we've been really working hard at trying to improve those math classrooms. But maybe educators have been playing the wrong game for a little while, and so we have to think about what we're going to do. So our education system has been designed by people to get everyone to play by certain rules, and like a game, it comes with instructions, and that the instructions tell them what the goals is. So when you're playing a game, you want to figure out what it means to win the game. And so in this game of teaching mathematics, right now the goal is about addition. It's about more things. We're adding more things to the classroom, and we're adding more technology and more games and laptops. And all these things are designed to try to increase our scores and to have higher marks and grades. And that's what we think is winning the game. Do I think we need to change the game? I think we do. I think we need to rethink what that goal is and help transform those classrooms back to the playground that we loved. Play is valuable. When children are little, they play, and that's how we make sense of the world. And then we had recess, and recess made play separated from learning. And as we get older, play is now embedded in objects like video games and apps on your phone, and so we activate play when we want to. So we need to bring back that frame of mind where play is the center of the classroom, and that we can create classrooms where they can be successful by being creative, giving them choices, experimenting, and collaborating and working together. So maybe the goal is not about adding, maybe the goal is about empowering. And so when we feel, empowerment comes from within, and when we feel empowered, we have feelings of confidence and meaningfulness and impact and autonomy. And so when our students are feeling empowered, they're actually, they're realizing and understanding that their participation and their ideas are what makes the classroom work. So we have creative teachers that are empowering students through exploring and problem solving and making connections to students as unique human beings. So we have a better chance of deeper understanding, and students like math are more engaged, and these are the things that are going to make us successful, and I think this is what we want. So if you think about the classroom, there might be a problem with something like math anxiety. And here's an example of a problem that we can find a solution to. So let's think about the solution to the old game. So that would be about adding things. So we're going to add maybe a fun game in the classroom for them to play, to practice more, and maybe it'll have high scores and rewards. Maybe we'll support them by adding more tutors and math clinics, and maybe we'll have video lessons that they can watch outside of the classroom. Maybe we'll give them more worksheets and packages that they can work through to help them prepare for tests and exams. I'm going to go with solution number 2. I'm going to launch a campaign. I want to have a classroom that's going to cultivate creativity by open-ended questions and play, and I'm going to abolish grading, and I'm going to get rid of tests and quizzes. I'm going to band together forward-thinking teachers, and we're going to think about alternatives to testing, and we're going to have different teaching strategies inside the classroom, because that's where the learning happens. And we're going to promote student thinking and conversations. So I want to create a mathematics classroom using play as the frame for everything. I'm going to transform that class into a space designed for students where play will create a reason for them to want to engage. And I can tell you that I've re-engaged a student who was given up on learning and connected to his creative side in woodworking to show me his thinking in grade 9 math. I had a student with Asperger's who had teachers misunderstand him for years, struggled to finish the course, and showed me his thinking through his own creative ways. So maybe this new solution is more about what you can't measure. That is what's important. A test can't tell me that much about a student's ability to persevere, to be curious, out-of-the-box thinking, collaboration, or grit. So what I want to do is I want to start a movement. I want to start a math movement. What I want to do is to start building a community of educators who sense that something's not right with the old game. I want you to tweet it, blog it, share it, inspire others. I think we will win because we will see students be engaged, light up, driven to share with us what they figured out, and we're going to help them see the possibilities. Creative spaces are going to allow our students to experience math through play, build confidence, and we're going to promote and strengthen the human spirit, and I think that's a win for our math students. Thank you.
So I guess what I would like you to take away from that, I know it is an elementary school, I mean, it's a K-12 conference that I was at, obviously a math conference for K-12, and I am talking to an audience of educators that they're K-12, but I guess it's really how can we help our students practice critical thinking, creative problem solving skills, and that's really what employers are asking for. And that's really what the world needs, I think. And so I don't think that we've been doing that very well with in terms of with our grading practices. So what I did, and I guess this is just again a bit of my journey of how I ended up for most of my teaching career teaching with ungrading. So I would spiral the curriculum, and I'll talk, that just means that we do everything over cycles. And so I would teach everything about the course, all the components of the course, all the different sections, all within a couple of weeks. And then I would repeat it and recycle, and I would cycle through those units every single maybe 4 or 5 times through the semester. So purpose of that is, and I'll talk a bit about that later with some of the strategies, but that the main reason for that is that it's giving the students a lot of opportunities to make mistakes, to fail, to come back and learn. So that if a student goes through unit 1 and has trouble with something, they can't do trigonometry, they tend to just put it aside and, okay, I failed that test. I'm going to put it at the back of my binder. I'm going to put it in the trash can. I'm just going to delete it. I'm not going to worry about it. And then I'll worry about it when it comes to the exam. But rather than doing that, they have many, many opportunities, 4 or 5 times to come back and revisit it as we go from more complex problem solving by the time we get to the end of the course. I do no grades, and I only give feedback to the students. So students will do tests, exams, test assignments and work in groups and work whatever, but there's no grades. It's all about feedback. Students spend time reflecting about how they have managed to master the skills and competencies that I outlined for them for the course. And then they actually do the self-assessment. We do some peer assessment, but basically it's a self-assessment process to come up with their marks. So they come up with a grade, and then we have to do because we're not allowed to not have a final exam. I call the final summative, which they co-construct and work with me to create that and to decide what that final summative is going to be. So that's what I did. This is just a quick picture of the actual mastery sheet, I guess, if you want to call it, for a particular unit in mathematics. So these are the kind of things I would outline for them. What are the big ideas you should be learning? What are some of the skills that you need, concepts that you need to master? And they think about where they are as they go through the course based on what they're doing and based on the feedback that I give them. And then at the end, they do a reflection piece to basically tell me why they think they should get the mark that they have. So they'll do a slide deck for me. They'll go through each of the topics that we talk about that we've been learning, and then they they reflect on what happened and how they learned, what they learned, how they improved, where they think they are, based on what the feedback that I've been giving them. And then they come up with their mark. So I guess the question then I would ask is, how are the grading models we use in higher ed connected to our beliefs about teaching and learning? And it kind of goes back to that same what I said earlier about, what we're doing in the classroom in terms of engaging our students in our learning activities and setting up, classrooms where they can engage and be active. And why aren't we doing that in our assessments? So here are some of the strategies that you can think about. And I guess when we're thinking about ungrading, I guess I like to call it grading for equity as opposed to ungrading. And I don't want to, it's not really grading, it's not really having no grades at all necessarily. We can talk about starting small and just thinking about grades in general. So a couple of ways to look at this is standards-based grading. And this is very popular, I think, for people in STEM. I think there's certain standards or certain concepts that they think are very important that students can master and that they are able to do. So you develop a set of standards related to the content that you're teaching, provide many opportunities for your students to demonstrate that they have mastered these standards. And so that's one way we can do standards-based grading. And so if you know that they are able to do 80% of the standards, then they get 80%. Portfolio, again, very popular now, is having students do a collection of their work to track their progress instead of essays or assignments, but really having them pick out, create a portfolio, and pick out a collection of work that shows their growth over the semester, and then have that some of them ready for evaluation. And then the last one is more what I had said, which is thinking about no grades, assigning no grades at all, only giving feedback, and then having students self-assess for their grade, and then having a conference for the final grade. That can be, there's a lot of work involved in that, right? In terms of providing the right assignments and the right feedback and how you're going to set up. So there's some work involved with the last strategy, as well as the idea of conferencing, maybe not work if you have a very large number of students in your class, and so that's just not possible. So you're going to have to rely a little more on peer assessments and self-assessments and teaching them how to do that. So, so that's 3 possible strategies of moving into grading for equity. So in the terms of a summary of our discussions today, I just wanted to sort of summarize and then maybe leave a couple minutes for questions and comments. But the summary of our discussion today is just the idea of moving from test scores and grades to student agency. So reorienting the pedagogy using the power of the classroom and activities and assessments to cultivate curiosity and critical thinking in our students, which I think is so important. The pedagogy of voice is a way of describing the intersection of critical pedagogy and cultural responsive teaching. So it's instruction that's now focused and centered on learning, and it empowers our students. So we're going to transcend metrics, percentages, and letter grades. We're going to talk about that street level learning experience. We want to promote innovative thinking, problem solving, cognitive growth, and agency. And we're going to really focus on observations, conversations, and products. We need to decenter this idea of compliance and grading, and that search for those right answers, reduce that need for competition. So I think I recognize that to do all of this and to even try some of those strategies will feel uncomfortable. So I'm going to give you 5 very simple ways that you can start empowering students. The first one is about co-constructing success criteria. And I think I mentioned that a couple of times in the presentation. I think it's so important to involve your students in terms of determining what success is and co-constructing your success criteria. And you can do that for each assignment, for each project, for the course, for the final exam, the final evaluations, anything you need to involve the students and hear student voice. That's very important. The second is what I talked about earlier. You really need good questions. You need to think about what are the questions that will engage your students, involve all the students in your classroom and not leave people out. So how do you engage all of them into the learning conversation? So thinking about the types of questions you ask. The third is it's about learning is messy. So I guess in the pedagogy of compliance, not voice, it's still very dominant really in the post-secondary level. I had a bet with my boss when I first started a few years ago. I hadn't walked, really hadn't walked around the college and looked at the classrooms very much yet. I was still coming from a VP role where I could just walk into any classroom and look and see what's happening and get involved with the students and so forth. So it was a very rigid environment for me. And I said, okay, well, I'll just walk through the college and look into the classrooms, and I'll buy you a coffee if I see anything other than somebody standing in front of the room. I went through the entire 3 floors of the building and did not see anyone who was standing, except I didn't see anyone who was not standing at the front of the classroom. So my boss didn't get a coffee. So, I mean, it was still very much lecture based. Students were still sitting in rows. I mean, maybe the conversations were really engaging, maybe what they were doing, but it still looked that way. Teachers were carrying that cognitive load, and I really didn't see a lot of student engagement. And so I don't really know why you would do that when we know that students don't learn that way. So why set up your classroom that way and teach in a way when we know that learning is messy? Students learn best from each other. They learn from that problem posting model of education that we've heard of. And so they need to, not the banking model, right? The problem posting model. They need to interact in different ways amongst students and with the teacher. So that's really important, and that's something that you can easily get started on. The fourth one is a little bit harder, but it's about reducing grades, right? So it doesn't have to be grade less, it's just grading less, right? So and providing more feedback. So the street data that we talked about, it reminds us that we need to provide more feedback, less grades for students to allow them to grow and learn. And I think in workshop 3, I will be discussing more about feedback and providing feedback and how to provide effective feedback, and talk about feedback in student conferences where possible, and then using peer and self-assessments regularly, and then making sure that you teach them how to do that. And then the last one is actually interesting because we always talked about it in K-12, but we don't really talk about it much in post-secondary, but it's just most recent, most consistent. So really important on allowing redos and retries and having a culture of revision and reflection. So really encouraging students to try more challenging problems without that fear of failure or being judged, providing continual opportunities for practice and revisions. That's the point behind the spiraling of the curriculum, and providing feedback. Students will, I think, learn to develop courage and confidence to work on. They will know how to improve, and they will learn more until they have mastered those skills and concepts and the application of their knowledge in a much more effective way, and in a way that they'll remember. And so, you learn how to drive a car. If you were going to do your driving test on the first day that you got behind the wheel, you're probably most likely going to fail. So I'm not going to judge you as a driver based on that. I'm going to know that after you've been behind the wheel for hours and you've been going through driver's ed, or someone's taught you, or you've been driving with somebody and been learning as you go, I'm going to judge you as a driver or you're going to take that test at the end of that. So it's the most recent and most consistent, I think is important to remember. So that's kind of a summary of what I think I call the pedagogy of voice. And I just wanted to thank you for attending this first workshop. I think that educating students should create opportunities to nurture creativity, to fuel curiosity about what they're learning, and to create a person who appreciates their subject area intellectually, emotionally, and socially. And I think that numerical mark changes the student's experience from meaning and learning, and it creates an illusion that their worthiness is just a result of some kind of calculation. And this is, I think, the story for so many students, even more so for marginalized students. And I think those unheard voices are of so many. that exist. And so here's hoping that we begin to trust a different type of story. So to continue our journey in our stories, I hope you will join me next week at the same time, same place, for the second workshop of the series, Let's Talk Pizza. In that one, we're going to talk about rethinking assessment. We're going to look at higher ed examples of alternative and authentic assessments and talk about that. So thank you. That's a great book. The Lockhart book. Thank you.
Oh, wow. Thank you. Thank you, Amy. Thank you for a great session. You made me like maths. I didn't like maths when I went to school. So, so I hope everybody feels the way I'm feeling. We appreciate you. We appreciate your time. And
Thank you.
we have shared, yes, we have shared a feedback link for you to give us feedback on this session. Thank you, everybody, for being here. I'm going to stop the recording just in case someone wants to have a personal conversation with Amy. So thank you, everybody, and see you tomorrow. Bye.
Hey, Amy.